Welcome to No Cold War Perspectives. We have with us today somebody who really needs no introduction. He has a long CV. He's been doing a number of things. I think of him now as the man who went and shocked the European Parliament. Jeffrey, welcome to No Cold War Perspectives.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, you've been really an important voice talking about the need to end this catastrophic war in Ukraine. I just want to give you some time to explain to people why you think this war should end, what the Europeans are doing that you think is not helpful to end the conflict, and what should happen as quickly as possible.
Of course, the war should end because people are dying, because the destruction is terrible. The economic costs are terrible, first to Ukraine, which is being hugely bloodied and damaged and threatened with its very survival, but also to Europe and to much of the world. But the point is, this is a war that never should have happened. It was completely avoidable. And contrary to the propaganda in the US media and in the European media, this is a war provoked by the United States and provoked by an arrogant US approach towards Russia over a 30-year period. I saw a lot of it with my own eyes. I objected to it all along the way. But nonetheless, that arrogance has continued, and it has been devastating. So what happened? What happened, of course, was that at the end of 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 successor states. The lead successor state, sometimes called the continuation state, was Russia. Russia needed financial help for stabilization. The United States was not interested. The economic crisis in Russia was pretty tough for many years in the 1990s. And in that period, the US policy came to be what's now called neocon policy or neoconservative policy or unipolar policy. But the American security elite said, we now run the world. We're the sole superpower. And basically, we can do whatever we want. We can go to war with anyone we want. We can overthrow any regime we want. We can put our military bases anywhere we want. Russia can't resist. China is a bunch of rice villages. The arrogance was astounding. And I saw some of this very close up. Now I'm reading, by the way, minutes of National Security Council meetings that have been released by Freedom of Information Act or declassification, and the arrogance is everywhere to be seen. One of the points of arrogance was that the US would create its unipolar world by expanding NATO. I think they viewed NATO as it was going to go global. It was going to be anywhere they wanted. But in the first instance, it would move eastward from the Western European original home of NATO and to go all the way to the Russian borders and quite possibly beyond into Central Asia. Now, this was against the promise, explicit promise, made, and we can even date it to February 7th, 1990, but then repeated many times afterwards to President Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward as Germany was reunified and as the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact military alliance was dissolved. But the US cheated, and it began NATO enlargement. President Clinton basically oversaw that cheat starting in 1994. And the idea from the start was that it would go all the way to Ukraine, to Russia's border. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the leading analysts and strategists of the US, wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, where he envisioned the world as a game, which is unfortunately an American attitude, literally as a game. Of course, that steals from the British, the great game of the 19th century, because these empires actually view real lives as games and as pieces to move around the board. Brzezinski says, we're going to go to Ukraine. What can Russia do about it? Nothing, he says. Well, the Russians had a different point of view, which is don't come to our border. We reject that. The United States provoked in countless ways, not only NATO enlargement, but unilaterally abandoning the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, which was a hugely destabilizing move in the context of the nuclear arms framework to try to keep the world from blowing itself up. The US took away one of the foundations of nuclear arms control unilaterally. The US invaded Iraq on completely false pretenses, a kind of crazy war. The US, with a covert regime change operation that lasted more than a dozen years, went to overthrow the Syrian government, an ally of Russia, beginning in 2011. The US used NATO to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. And the US committed that NATO would move to Ukraine. When Ukraine had a neutralist president, one who didn't want NATO enlargement, and the public didn't want NATO enlargement, the US worked to overthrow that Ukrainian pro-neutral president, Viktor Yanukovych. And on February 22nd, 2014, a violent coup overthrew the president, and the United States played a big role in that coup.